Hey everybody, it's Control, episode 19, the plot episode. I know I'm not terribly interested in discussing the plot of Control, but I do have to spend an episode on it anyway. So I'd like to talk about why I keep giving it a B- or a C+, and explain, the sorts of considerations you might have if you're making a similar game. We have to understand that games are subject to all sorts of pressures. You cannot ever have a game that is exactly like you intended, so it could very well be that the plot wasn't intended to be this scattered, and they had a lot of really cool ideas about how to pull it together at the right time, and it just fell apart. That's very possible. Production pressure does that. But we have to talk about the game we got, not the game they had ideas about. The game we got has a million different pieces that never end up fitting together emotionally. They fit together logically, but they don't really pull correctly. Let's talk about that. There's always going to be exposition in games, but the point of an expositionary beat in a game is to make you want to do the next thing in the game. This game doesn't do that. So far, the exposition has been really lame, and then we finally got to a good exposition beat, and it doesn't connect to the next beat of the game. We just learned all of our backstory. Oh, we grew up in Ordinary, and we found this projector, and the projector had things in it. And we started to accidentally summon these things by turning the projector on, and so we found another thing from the projector that could help us to fight the first things from the projector, and then your boss swept in and took everything, including my brother, but he left the thing we summoned with me. That's the plot. There's a lot of things that we could want to do. Let's find whoever captured our brother. Let's see if we can find our brother directly. Let's see if we can find traces of Ordinary. Let's see if we can find the projector. Let's see if we can find one of the projector's slides. Let's see if we can find out more about the nature of carrying something with you. None of those are actually what the next beat of the game is. After learning all of that stuff, what's the next beat? Go track down this lady you know nothing about in this place you don't care about, because maybe she'll be able to point you to something you do care about. Lame. Let's give you some very basic alternatives. Don't tell her about Polaris. You don't reveal that you've got an entity in your head. You just say that you're here because your brother was kidnapped and you want to find him. And what does she say? Well, I can't find out too much about your brother, but here are some files that could be him, and all of these people were brought in by this lady. This lady is down in research. Maybe you should go ask her. Punching her in the head first is optional, but now you care. You want to go down into research and find this lady because she kidnapped your brother. She's the one that did it. Or alternately, reveal the thing in your head and not your brother. And then you get a beat that's like, okay, well, things in your head, that's really, so-and-so's department. You should go and see if they can enhance your conversations, let you converse more clearly, maybe give you better powers, all sorts of stuff like that. Not connecting it to the next beat of the plot means that you've wasted your exposition. You've spent your exposition and it's just fizzled. Of course, the opposite can also happen, like with our earlier exposition of, hey, Director Trench, I just spent an hour and a half trying to find you. Do you have anything interesting to say? And Director Trench says, yeah, the 4 people that are in charge of the building are in charge of the building, and maybe you should, talk to them. Thanks, Director Trench. Really wise advice from beyond the grave. Hey, Director Trench, what about this reactor? It seems like it's going to explode. You have any advice? Yeah, you should make it so it doesn't explode, because if it explodes, it'll explode. Thanks, Director Trench. Excellent advice from beyond the grave. That's the kind of exposition we've been getting so far, and this is definitely better than that. But it's still pretty weak. It doesn't connect properly. Now, in the fullness of time, the pieces do come together. They are related. I don't think they're related very well. It still feels very forced to me. But what can you do? Well, let's talk about what you can do. Let's talk about some alternate setups, some structural setups for the story. Let's say if we were going to be building the story from ground zero, like we had the story Bible, and the game was starting to come together, and we needed to make sure that the story would structurally hold up, what kind of structural changes could we make to the story? Well, the first structural change we should consider is we don't want two pulls. Right now we've got a psychic thing in our head, and we've got our search for our brother. Those are two completely separate pulls. What we should have is one pull. So how about the voice in our head is our brother? And we're wondering exactly what Director Trench took when he took the body of our brother away. We need that body. Our brother would like it back. What's in that body now? Well, the same thing that's in that body in this game's plot, the hiss. Can we drive the hiss out of the body and put our brother back in? Well, the plot says that so far, driving the hiss out of people has resulted in those people dying. So maybe we have to jump through some very serious hoops to get the hiss out of our brother's body and put him back in. That seems like a very easy driving force, and it's a single driving force that serves both purposes. It doesn't require any fundamental changes to how the plot progresses. It's just a structural change that allows you to tell the story easier and with more emotional drive. Here's another structural change. This game is clearly strongest when it comes to the levels, so we should want to connect to the levels more aggressively. The Oldest House is an amazing concept. It is incredible, and this game should be about the Oldest House. I should want to go places in the Oldest House. I should want to do things in the Oldest House. I should want to get to know why it exists, what its opinions are. It obviously isn't human, but I still want to connect to it and figure out what's going on. How do I do that? Well, the game actually already lets you. There are several sequences where the Oldest House interacts with you in a really fun way. Like there's a maze later on, the matchstick maze or whatever it's called. There's like a rock sequence and you're partying out and you're running through and you're shooting people, bam, 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 pow, pow. And it's like you're on the same side and it's super cathartic. That should be like half an hour into the game because it makes you like the Oldest House. It makes you think of the Oldest House as a person, as a thing you can interact with, as an individual. The Oldest House is the strongest part of the game. It should be a major part of how we care about the game. The plot that doesn't involve the Oldest House isn't interesting. So the Oldest House should be far more central to everything in the game. Structurally, it should be much more central. How do we do that? Well, one possibility, the Oldest House communicates with us a lot more freely. So, for example, right now the Oldest House is really focused on giving us powers and stuff like that, but instead of giving it to us directly, the Oldest House uses the board. The board comes in and says, here is your gun, here is your next power, here is what we're concerned about. Don't use the board. The board is a distraction. It's not part of the Oldest House directly. It's not helping us to connect to the Oldest House. It's just obfuscation for the sake of obfuscation. Here's an alternative. You know why the director committed suicide? Director Trench committed suicide? Because the Oldest House needed him to talk to us. So whenever we get a new power, whenever we get a new gun, whenever we face a new challenge, the Oldest House brings out phantom memories from Director Trench and explains them using that. But as time goes on and Director Trench fades because he's dead, those interactions get less and less human and more confused. Bits of Director Trench past, bits of his past start to bleed into the conversations. The dialogue that he has is no longer making human sense because it's not a human using it. The soundboard that the house is using to communicate with us is becoming more corrupted. This will let us see bits of Director Trench's past, like when he visited our hometown and when he was talking to our brother, and it will also be really cool. Just imagine as you're going through the game, every time you get a new power, every time you get a new thing, the tutorial is more fragmented and confused. Not because the place is falling apart, but because it has a really hard time talking to you, and every time you get something new, the dead guy that it's puppeting gets a little more dead. Doesn't that sound interesting? And that forms a direct connection between us and the Oldest House. We understand that Director Trench is being piloted by the Oldest House. We understand that the whole reason he's dead is because the Oldest House just needed a mouthpiece. Fun. Great. I love it. this image of Director Trench, it might look over at us. There are lots of other possibilities. For example, what about all the other places? There are reasons why you might want the oldest house to be the only place that has like an internal life of its own. But let's imagine that we're a little bit more forgiving about that concept and we allow a lot of different places to have their own concept of self, like the Black Rock Mesa, or the Black Rock Quarry rather, or the town of Ordinary even. Maybe the reason the town of Ordinary was wiped off the map was because it was becoming sentient. And we'll find it contained within the oldest house. It was consumed by the oldest house. That sounds interesting to me. All of these places can have their own perspectives and needs, their own wishes, and they can react in different ways, and none of them are human. They're all very hard to understand, but we want to understand them. Once we understand that they are self-directed, we want to interact with them. And maybe they can be allowed to interact with us a lot more directly. Like, as we walk over here, maybe it'll extend out like a pylon so we can touch the Black Pyramid. Every time we run into a captured point like these, but without, when the enemy has them, maybe it'll pull up a new kind of old weapon from the archives and try and give it to us, but, it's not very human. It doesn't understand how these weapons work. There's no bullets in this gun. It doesn't really have a concept of that. Maybe it's just summons up a picture of a gun because it doesn't understand the difference between a picture of a gun and a gun. These are ways that we can communicate with the oldest house and with any other facility that we decide should have a personality. It would be really evocative. We would want to know what's going on. We would want to know what sort of situations does the oldest house like or dislike? What exactly is going on and how can we fit into it? We could take it further. What is Polaris? A thing? No, it's a place. The slide that we put into the projector to show Polaris, that's Polaris. The slide itself, like when it projects, when it exists, that location is Polaris. And the hiss? Well, guess what? They're just another slide. A place. And when we go into that place also goes into us. And when Director Trench turned off and stole that projector, Polaris has been stuck in her head ever since. She can't be a place. She's stuck not being a place. Do you have any idea how confusing and uncomfortable that is? When she wants to talk with us, she talks with us via becoming a place, however temporarily. If she wants us to go through a door like this door, she will form a place where this door does not exist. That's a really powerful writing tool. She can make us move forward through the plot. And when she drives the hiss out of these control points, do you really think she's given these control points back to the oldest house? She's taking them. Both she and the hiss want to become the oldest house. They have a place they want to be. And they're going to make that happen by taking these control points and reshaping the oldest house in their own image. And you have to decide, what are you going to do? Are you going to side with Polaris? She's been helping you for all this time, but she's going to kill and eat the oldest house from the inside like a parasite. Are you going to side with the oldest house, even though Polaris is your friend? Are you going to manage to figure out some kind of happy medium? These are things that have emotional stakes. They're interesting and they use the concepts of the game within the game in a way that is emotionally tense. When I find a floppy disk that lets me shoot things, that's not emotionally tense. It doesn't give me a strong connection to how things are unfolding or to what things mean. When I find a horse that gives me the ability to dash, it's not pushing the plot forward. It's not connected emotionally. And that's why I give the current implementation of this plot a B- and talk so much about alternatives. That said, I do understand that my alternatives are just me, talking. It's easy to talk. And this game has a ton of admirers, like basically everybody. So I'm not going to claim that my ideas are for the best. But if you are making your own game and you have a plot similar to this, Consider how the pieces will fit together and drive your game emotionally. Consider how when you reveal something, it should make the player want to play the next part of the game. These are important factors. And that's it. Hopefully I won't have to talk too much about the plot. We can get back to talking about levels! Alright. Have a good one.